Aha! All right. Is this thing on? This thing on? Okay. Looks like it's on. Let's get into it. 10 years ago, oh my God. It hurts to think about it. 10 years ago, your boy was on a stretcher in the hospital, in the ER, having my heart shocked back into rhythm due to overcaffeination, overstress, overwork. I was working 7 days a week, running my company. 50 employees at the time, would take it to 100 employees, would end up selling it to Airbnb. But oh my God, was that the lowest of my low, sitting there in the ER, drained of everything. Turns out my heart had been beating at 175 beats per minute for over 3 weeks. I thought I was doing everything right, hustling my ass off, as they say. But every time I pushed the pedal forward, I felt like life would just go in reverse. Everything I intended would just blow up in my face. Fast forward 10 years, 8 years of daily morning reflection and study. 3 companies, 4 venture funds, over 200 startup investments, 3 little daughters under the age of 5, 3 podcasts, and I can't remember the last time I had a stressful day. One of the other podcasts, by the way, is on this exact same topic. It's called Yoga for Your Intellect. I'll put the link in the show notes where you can check out longer form conversational podcasts around this philosophy that I'm going to tell you about today. So what is the difference? What changed? Well, I opened up a bedside table at a hotel in Malibu and it had a book called Vedanta Treatise. But what the hell is Vedanta? What are the Vedas? I spent 3 years and a couple thousand hours in my 20s going deep into Eastern philosophy. After growing up Catholic, I really relished what you could say, the psychotherapy of Eastern philosophy, paired with my Christian upbringing. I would listen to hours on end of Alan Watts, Ram Dass, Joseph Campbell. These were my digital mentors. These lighthouses that were pointing towards these truths that came up in nearly every philosophy and religion around the world. But the common unity between them was that the philosophy that they studied was the Vedantic philosophy, the philosophy found in the Vedas. Vedanta just means end of the Vedas, because at the end of the Vedas, it's the crystallized philosophy called the Upanishads. By the way, something just to get ahead of right now, in Sanskrit, there's 12 words for the same thing. So you might hear different words for what is essentially the same thing. Vedas, Vedanta, Upanishads, Sanatana Dharma. In fact, it's in the Rig Veda. Truth is one, sages call it by many names. Some of these books, if you could even call them that, are only 13 verses long. Some are 70. It's actually a quite concise, succinct philosophy. And the commonality between my digital mentors that I was listening to for hours on end, for years, between Alan Watts, Joseph Campbell, Ram Dass, is that they studied these very scriptures daily. So after going a mile wide and an inch deep on different philosophies, an eclectic approach to philosophy in general, I wanted to go a mile deep at the source of nearly every Eastern philosophy, and that was Vedanta. In fact, the adage goes a little bit like this. You have the Vedas, you have the crystallized philosophy, and then you have layers of rituals built on top of the philosophy. That becomes Hinduism. Buddhism is Hinduism made for export. As it leaves India and enters China, it's simplified back to the philosophy. You actually can't export culture very well, but you can export simple, beautiful ideas that can reorient your life, improve your community. And that becomes Buddhism as it enters China. Buddhism takes on derivations like Zen as it enters Japan. But if you follow Zen to Buddhism to Hinduism, back to its source, you have the Upanishads. And that's what Vedanta is. The Upanishads sit at the end of the Vedas, and Vedanta means the end of the Vedas. Vedanta is actually quite simple and straightforward. It can be summed up in a matter of a few minutes, which I'm happy to do here in a sec. But first off, let me tell you what Vedanta is not. Most think of highfalutin academic intellectualism when they think of philosophy. The word can actually bore most people. Western philosophy, in its own right, is as much about historical figures, and they're oftentimes vague or hard to understand ideas, as it is about the ideas themselves. Vedanta is not that. Vedanta is as practical as it is deep. Anything you learn here each day could be applied within an hour following listening to it. Vedanta is also not a religion. There are no rites or rituals. There are no shoulds or should-nots within the philosophy of Vedanta. And you can benefit from one idea without taking any of the others wholesale. In fact, that's what most people do, is they find the ideas that blow them away, and those ideas can transform, reorient their life for a season, but not take to the philosophy as a whole. You are absolutely welcome to do that with this philosophy, as opposed to many religions that say, hey, if any of this makes sense to you, all of it must be taken in. This is not that. But if you want an overview of this ancient philosophy that goes back nearly 8,000 years that we know of, let me sum it up as if it's a metaphorical book with 3 chapters. The first chapter is on life. Life is a stream of experiences. That's what life is, a stream of experiences, one experience after another. And an experience is made up of a subject, me or you, and the environment. You're outside on a cold, windy day. That experience is you as the subject outside in an environment that is cold and windy. That creates that experience, that unit of life in your stream of experiences of life. Vedanta says that you could spend all of your time trying to fix, change, improve the environment. And it's like pushing back a wave. Or as Vedanta Ramatirtha, a great sage, once said, it's like straightening a dog's tail. It could work for a little bit, but it takes so much energy, and over time, trying to push back that wave will exhaust and destroy you. Instead of trying to change the environment, Vedanta says it's much more efficient to change the subject, to improve the subject, to handle a cold and windy day, to maybe even to enjoy the benefits of a cold and windy day, if that's the environment you're in. In other words, you could try to burlap the world or just wear sandals. The second chapter in this metaphorical book is on the individual, that subject that we aim to improve. Each individual is made up of 3 equipments, and this might be the central contribution of the philosophy of Vedanta. There are 3 main equipments we have to navigate the world. We have a body, which that's nothing new. We all know that. We have a mind. Also, not going to blow people away with that factoid. But there's one other internal equipment. You have the mind, yes, but you have another internal equipment called the intellect that is there to guide the mind. And Vedanta, another phrase for it is yoga for your intellect. In the same way you would tone your body to become physically fit, there's a practice and approach each day to tone the intellect that then guides and drives the mind and the body wherever you want to go. This central contribution that you have 2 internal equipments, a mind and an intellect, to work together, we're starting to scratch the surface of this in modern psychology, of dual systems thinking. You might have heard phrases like thinking fast and thinking slow. Well, which part of us thinks fast and which part thinks slow? You might have heard of dual systems thinking, or a few years ago it was hip to say the reptilian brain. There are 2 internal equipments, and we actually, so many of us use phrases like mindset or frame of mind. But all of these things touch on it, but never go explicitly into naming what is that other system, that other equipment. The intellect is that equipment, according to Vedanta. You can think about the mind and the intellect in terms of a river. The mind is like the water. It is the flowy stuff. It's the emotions, the feelings, the likes, the dislikes, the preferences that we have. The intellect is like the banks of that river. If you don't have good banks to your river, you're going to flood the plainlands, kill all the livestock, kill everything around it, and no one would build even a house on a river that flooded easily. But if you have strong banks to the river, you could build multiple civilizations on it. You could have massive cities built on the banks of a strong river like that. Thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people supported by that river, that same very river, because of the strong banks. And within the philosophy of Vedanta, the sages say that it is our primary purpose to develop and cultivate that intellect. Now let's jump into the third chapter of this metaphorical book. And this is the deep end of the pool. The Upanishads and the sages that have come that understood these texts and have illuminated the wisdom within them over the last several thousands of years all say the same thing. And that is this: none of this is real. Everything we're perceiving is a projection of the mind. Now, technically speaking, it's more like a projection of ignorance, but for the limitations of language and for this intro episode, we'll just refer to it as a projection of the mind. And it is just like an elevated version of the dream, where in the dream, every night, go to bed, and you project an entire world. You project other people, the ground, gravity, shoes, clothes, the drama, the interactions with people where you are projecting, you're creating this entire universe, and yet you don't know what's about to happen. And you're able to perceive with your senses, touch a wall and say, yes, this has to be real. You're convinced that it is real. And the irony is when someone says that the state we're in right now is not real, well, it's natural to knock on a table, to touch a wall, to pinch yourself and say, well, of course this is real because I can sense it. And yet within the next 24 hours, you'll fall asleep. You'll project an entire universe. And your senses will also tell you that that's real. To then wake up, realize how faulty it is to use our senses to tell us what's real and what isn't, only to within 5 minutes, use it all over again and say, well, this must be real because I'm able to perceive it. Vedanta actually says there's 3 states that we experience: the deep sleep state, where there is no perception and senses; the dream state, which we just covered; the elevated version of the dream state, the waking state, where we are perceiving a world, perceiving a universe, perceiving duality between us and other people or us and our environment. And then it says there's this 4th state that we do not experience, but it is our natural state. That's called turiya, which just means in Sanskrit, 4th. This 4th state, this is what we yearn for. Like my teacher, Swami Parthasarathi, always says, it's like a spring that's compressed down, yearning for its original state. And no matter what you stack around it, no matter what comforts you provide it, it will always yearn for its original, uncompressed state. And that's what we're doing. That's what we do when we pursue nearly every worldly goal that we could go after, is we're trying to get back to that natural, uncompressed, liberated state that is the 4th state. Many religions and philosophies have different names for this. You have Socrates and his allegory of the cave. You have heaven in many Western traditions. You have liberation, moksha, nirvana. All of these point to the same thing, and that is perfect freedom. That perfect freedom, that original state, that 4th state, is not only possible, it is your birthright according to the Upanishads. This is called Maya, Sanskrit word for illusion or superimposition. That's blocking us from seeing what's really going on. Not that nothing is happening, but that it's not the reality of what is. A mundane example of this would be just the very fact that our entire realities come down to what we give our attention to. You could be locked into a book, into a video, completely unaware of what's going on around you, completely unaware of maybe a fire that is about to consume everything around you. And you can't notice it because you are locked into something you're giving your attention to. And the Vedas say that this is what we're doing on a grand scale, that we're giving our attention to something that is blocking our ability to see what is real, what is really going on. And that philosophy, in terms of continuous study, is the oldest known philosophy in human history. So as far-fetched as it might seem, you and I would be hard-pressed to find an idea in humanity that is more durable than that viewpoint I just shared. And the daily practice within such a philosophy is actually quite simple. It's to question everything, to not take anything for granted, and to reflect daily. That's it. That's the metaphorical book on this philosophy of Vedanta. And speaking of books, for those deeply interested, please bypass a channel like this completely and dive right into the book that changed everything for me. Written by my 96-year-old teacher and perhaps the best known living proponent of Vedanta. The book is called Vedanta Treatise, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well. And it's actually written with the clarity and rationale that you'll never see when it comes to this subject of philosophy. At least I had never seen such simple, clear, straightforward writing around not only the most practical, but also the most profound concepts that we as humans can entertain. That is because that single book was written over 23 years with 14 editions, simplifying and clarifying a manual for living well, becoming a bestseller and a lighthouse for over 2 million people worldwide, expounding on this philosophy. Though the deep end of the pool is obviously quite profound, the practicality of this philosophy is worth underscoring. My life has become so much simpler, and yet so much more dynamic. I'm doing 10 times more with 1/10 the amount of stress or strain, and it is due to this philosophy and spending a few minutes each morning reflecting on the concepts within this philosophy. So I wanted to start this channel to allow people to tap into this ancient timeless wisdom that is rarely presented in a modern, easy to access way on a channel like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. So you can follow along here by hitting subscribe or go into the show notes and you can see all of the social channels that we're also making this philosophy accessible through. You can follow them all. Each one maybe has a slightly different edit, whether it's 60 seconds on TikTok or it's 4 to 5 minutes in your podcast app or on YouTube. But it is all built around these daily reflections, these contemplative ideas that I want to share with you daily. This might resonate with 1 in 10,000 people. But if you're here, if you found this interesting and if you've listened to this point, then maybe you've caught a wave. And this is something that you've been interested in for a while, but maybe didn't have the words for it. Maybe didn't even know that these ideas had been articulated before, much less for thousands of years. So let's take back this word philosophy that can have a lot of baggage, that can feel like it's some academic and impractical term. And maybe let's reorient around not something big and ornate, but just around the word's perspective or clarity. To gain clarity, to gain perspective in the world that you are operating in. And we welcome all comments, questions, suggestions that you all leave along the way. So with that, welcome to the Daily Vedantic. Thanks for listening to the Daily Vedantic. This reflection is part of a free repeating 2-year course in Advaita Vedanta. Rooted in the timeless wisdom of the Upanishads, arguably the oldest philosophical texts on earth, you can begin with episode 1, which gives the 15-minute overview of the whole philosophy of Vedanta, or you can join the journey with any episode at any point. But the critical aspect of this course, of understanding and mastering anything, is to study and reflect, even for 10 to 15 minutes on the timeless each day, preferably at the start of your day. As is said in this philosophy, reflection is 100,000 times as powerful as listening. So listen, journal, sit with, discuss these concepts, or ask questions at thedailyvedantic.com with our AI-powered chatbot informed by about 700 episodes here, as regularly as one can if you want to see clarity and peace almost effortlessly unfold in your daily life. And if it doesn't result in a near immediate increase in clarity and peace, then toss aside and feel free to never listen again. One of the things that you might notice is after 7 or 8 days in a row, this doesn't feel like a discipline. This feels like a visit with a best friend to dive into the timeless with daily reflection. Within a few days, it becomes one of your favorite parts of the day. You can also find out more, including news about in-person events in Los Angeles and beyond, at the Daily Vedantic on Instagram or through our weekly newsletter at thedailyvedantic.com. Additionally, check out the links in our show notes for more resources like the books that are mentioned most frequently in the episodes, including Vedanta Treatise, perhaps the simplest and most straightforward read on this philosophy I've ever come across. Until next time, and from the entire team that works on the Daily Vedantic project, thanks for listening.